This is Culture Creators, and we're interviewing Mimi Brown, who has this amazing podcast that was just started, Altadena with Love, and we've posted it on our Instagram. But I don't think that people understand really what you've done to share what's happening in Altadena and the stories that are still happening, that's still going on. So can you tell us a little bit about like what inspired you, what's going on, all the things?
Sure, of course. So, To Altadena with Love is such a personal story for me. It's like a love letter for me to that community. So, I went to Altadena for a story, just to interview one person. And when I got there, I witnessed the devastation like I had never seen before. And what I realized is that everyone looked like me. And I was like, this is crazy. And so when I spoke to one person, I left, I went home and my phone started ringing. And it was the guy that I interviewed that day. It was a friend of his telling me that his home also burned down and he wanted to share his story. So that's when I realized that this isn't just one story, this was many stories. And they just wanted to be told and they wanted to tell their story in a way that was reflective of what was actually happening to them. And they wanted to just be free to feel like they could get it out. And so, I just packed up all my equipment, my backpack with my mic and my camera. And I went and we did some of the interviews in the middle of the street. We did some of them, in front of their homes. We did some of them at their relatives' house. Some were in Airbnbs. And, they just told their story, their true, raw, authentic story in their own voice.
So you have episode 2 of your podcast launching Monday. What is something that, that we don't know, right? Because we see all the relief efforts happening. And, rebuilding is not an overnight thing. But what are some of the challenges they're facing? And what are some of the things that you found that was still surprising?
So in episode 2, we go down and we kind of do some research. So the podcast itself, it's five episodes. And it's like a docu-series, but they're five different people or five or six different families, but they're all weaved together through the fire. But each episode tells a different story. So for example, episode 2 is about redlining. And what's so important about this is when you look at the devastation of the Eaton Fire and you realize that 17 people died and most homes that were burned on the west side of town, West Altadena. Why is that? Well, if you go back and you look at the research, Black people in the 60s were redlined to West Altadena. There was one real
Wow.
estate agent that sold basically all these homes to these families. And these families, these homes have been passed down through the generations. So when they lost their home, this was grandma's home that she bought 50, 60 years ago. And so I wanted to understand what that looked like and why all the homes that mostly burned down were on the west side of town. And so and they were Black people and it was due to redlining. So to understand today, I had to go back and really look at that. And then when you look at episode 3, episode 3 just talks about the timeline. Why did some residents get the notification that they needed to evacuate before other residents? It is me presenting the information. You can make your own conclusions, but when you look at it and then you hear the person who this affected, you're just left wondering what happened. What happened? So, yes, there was a UCLA study that showed that there were discrepancies in time in which the notifications were given. One side of town basically received the notification about 8 hours before another side of town. And so there's a woman that I interview, Stacey Mitchell, who points out that her family didn't receive the notification till about 3:30 in the morning, whereas the other side of town received it 8 hours earlier in time to evacuate. And we know that some of the people who died, they had mobility problems, so they needed that extra time to get out of the house. And so, I think this podcast, it just makes you think. It presents you with the evidence, and then you hear from a real person who this affected, and you can make your own conclusions on, what really happened during the Eaton Fire. So yeah, I think that it's a labor of love, and it's very exciting to be able to share this in a way that I think honors the victims and their stories and allows them to share it in their own words.
Wow, that's beautiful. And can you tell us, where can we listen to your podcast? Where can people who watch us tune in?
So you can go to altadena.com, but it is all it's available on every platform wherever you get your podcasts. If that's Apple or iHeart, Spotify, it's there. Just type into Altadena with Love.
Well, thank you, Mimi. And thank you for doing this. This is so important that we get, the right information out, but also share the stories of our communities that are really impacted by the fire and struggling to get back on their feet. So thank you so much for doing this.
Thank you, Joy. Thank you for shining a light. Thank you for allowing me to share this work with you and your platform. I really appreciate it.